The Progressive Era was a time of extensive reformation of American society, reconstructing the pre-existing social and political standards. Poor work conditions, corrupt government practices, and social inequality served as catalysts for the development of progressivism. Progressivism is an ideology that favors social improvement through government actions. Serving as the driving force of the Progressive Era, progressivism dominated the first 20 years of the 20th century. The progressive movement consisted of a wide variety of reforms, targeting abuses responsible for the oppression of millions of Americans. Of the numerous reforms made, the most notable include advancements in the rights of African Americans, women, and children. Facing widespread racism and injustice, African Americans were one of the most abused groups during the Progressive Era, with the separate but equal ruling of the 1896 Plessy v. Ferguson case adding to the pre-existing segregation policies. African Americans were further expelled from American society. However, with the growth of the progressive movement, African Americans were able to unite with the Allies to develop the NAACP in 1909, which still combats racial inequality to this day. Women of the Progressive Era fought against the many oppressions placed on them by the patriarchy, one of which was for the right to vote. In order to organize the suffragettes' efforts, the National American Women's Suffrage Association was formed on February 18, 1890. Suffragettes fought relentlessly to gain the right to vote, but it wasn't until the passing of the 19th Amendment in 1920 that they saw their work pay off. The corruption of industry had permitted for abuses against the American workforce and the development of cruel monopolies for decades prior to the Progressive Era. As a result of this, labor reform and government regulation became one of the first and most critical goals of the progressive movement. Some journalists at the time, called muckrakers, devoted their work to the revelation of the corruption in American industry. The work of these muckrakers led to one of the biggest accomplishments for the progressive movement. In a piece titled "The Jungle," muckraker Upton Sinclair exposed the disgusting work conditions of the meatpacking industry, leading to the signing of the Meat Inspection Act in 1906 by President Teddy Roosevelt. Prior to the progressive movement, children were used as tools in the advancement of corrupt industrialization. Subjected to poor work environments with no safety regulations and long shifts of grueling work with little pay, children would face injury, exhaustion, and sometimes even death in the workplace. While the National Committee on Child Labor was organized in 1904, it wasn't until 1918 that the Supreme Court overruled the federal child labor legislation. Government reform was a prominent goal of the progressive movement, targeting areas such as taxes and elections. While change first came to the state and local governments, the federal level was slower to adjusting to the progressive agenda. Through the Progressive Era, changes such as direct primaries, secret ballots, and referendums were put into place to allow the people to have more control in the election process. Overall, the reformations made during the Progressive Era were pivotal in the development of modern society. While progressives were able to change some aspects of the unethical nature of our nation, the reformations made cost little to the federal government, labeling the U.S. as a reluctant welfare state. Over the course of history, progressive hopes and ideals remained the foundation of our nation's society, fueling the spirit of change and equality for future generations.